a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening. You're watching GB News with me, Mears, standing in for Neil Oliver this evening. Coming up on the show, COP26. At the end of the first week, what has it achieved so far? Does eating a greener diet also mean we should eat more local produce? And is it too early to be thinking about Christmas? Oh no, it isn't. Oh yes, it is. But first, here's the news headlines with Karen Roberts.
Thank you, Ray. These are your latest headlines. Thousands of people are marching through Glasgow calling for more action to tackle climate change at the UN summit. It's part of the COP26 coalition's Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Demonstrations are taking place across the UK, including Nottingham, Cardiff, Belfast, Manchester and London. At the Glasgow climate protest, police have fenced in around 70 members of the Young Communist League. Labour MP Zara Sultana was at the London protest. She said world leaders have not made strong enough commitments so far.
So far, what's coming out of COP doesn't go far enough. There have been some policy announcements coming out around coal, but not everyone's even signing up to that. And coming from messaging that's coming out of the streets outside from Greta Thunberg and others, calling it a greenwash, a festival for the global north to just do PR.
There are some flashing images in this next story. Rapper Travis Scott has said that he's devastated after at least 8 people died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston, Texas. The incident, which left several others injured, happened while the rapper was performing at the Astroworld Festival on Friday evening. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 people who were in cardiac arrest. Mr. Scott pledged total support to the police investigation. At least 92 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near to Sierra Leone's capital. It happened after a bus struck the tanker in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who's in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6 months, but the booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout of the jabs ahead of winter. People will still only receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. The husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been on hunger strike outside the Foreign Office in Westminster for 2 weeks. Richard Ratcliffe criticised Prime Minister Boris Johnson for his cold decision to allow Iran to keep detaining Britons. His wife, Nazanin, a British-Iranian dual national, has been in custody in Iran since 2016 after being accused of plotting to overthrow the government there. Mr. Ratcliffe said a candlelit vigil attended by around 70 people last night gave him morale to keep going. He intends to continue the strike until at least the middle of next week.
Generally, I'd like him to take responsibility. He is in charge of the government, he's in charge of all the government's decisions. It is a cold decision to let the government's debt lead to British citizens being held hostage, including Nazanin. What I'd like him to be saying to the Iranian delegation is that this can't go on. We have to solve it, we have to find a way.
You are right up to date. Now back to Ray Mears.
COP26. It's exhausting. And we're only halfway through. Plant trees? Don't plant trees? How complicated could things be? I've been left feeling that the planet needs a kiss. Not a great smoochy lip smothering, but the type of kiss that stands for keep it simple, stupid. Let's look at the problems we're facing. Insulated by excessive CO2, methane and other gases, our planet is cooking. Pollution is increasing, poisoning the oceans, the rivers and air. The great forests of the world are being felled. Biodiversity is decreasing or being driven into extinction. Put simply, we are making our planet toxic to life as we know it. This is no longer a debate. It is a well-established fact, one in which we are already suffering the consequences and one which we cannot predict the long-term outcome of. In short, we are facing the greatest threat to life that our species has ever known. It's hardly surprising that there have been protests today. People want action. Yesterday, Greta Thunberg led a 25,000-strong youth demonstration outside of the COP26 conference in Glasgow. Downing Street responded dryly, commenting that it was unwise for children to strike from school in a year when their education has been so disrupted by COVID. While the Scottish Government, in a more empathetic reading of the mood, stated that children who took part in the rally should not be penalised. Environmental concerns have ignited the hearts of our youth. Surely this is one issue we should encourage them to engage with and to understand, for they will be the inheritors of the successes and failures. Greta, who had been looking rather marginalised at the conference, grabbed the headlines by denouncing COP26 as a failure and an exercise in greenwashing. But truly, it's too soon to make such a claim. For perhaps the first time, this conference has grabbed the world's attention. 120 world leaders came to Scotland. They came not just because they felt they should, but because their nations sent them. Here lies hope. Even more amazingly, more than 105 countries agreed to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. So many countries agreeing to work together is a momentous event in history that should not be lost under the heckling from microphones. But what of the important leaders that failed to show up? Neither Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin put in a personal appearance. And China missed an opportunity to take a lead in climate restoration, announcing that they do not feel able to pledge to become carbon neutral by 2030, arguing that they need 30 extra years because they did not industrialise as early as the West. This is a puerile argument at best. I certainly wouldn't want them in my kitchen. To me, problem solvers don't worry about who spilled the milk or when. They just get on with mopping it up. Ultimately, the biggest polluters have the most to gain. This week will ultimately determine whether or not it is seen as a success or failure, as through a blistering schedule of meetings, countries grapple with the nitty-gritty. To me, COP26 is the eve of a battle to save life on Earth, one in which failure is not an option. I hope that when the world's leaders hang their delegate photographs on their office walls, they pause a moment and remember that the world is watching and demanding real action. If they get it right, they'll be able to tell the tale of having been there. Those who stayed away, well, they can only hold their heads in shame as the world looks on with growing frustration. Do you hear the clock ticking? No autocracy or dictatorship will survive failing to solve the climate issues that we are facing today. Coming up on the show, the end of the first week of COP26, but is a serious discussion to help reduce carbon emissions, or COP out, taking place. Should we encourage the retired to downsize to help the housing market? And we meet our great Briton of the week. And remember, keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @GBNews or find us on Facebook. With me throughout the show, Laura Dodsworth, author of A State of Fear, and Mo Lovett, writer and academic. Thanks for joining us. What stories have caught your eye this week, ladies?
Well, like you say, COP26 has just about been everywhere, hasn't it? I don't know if people are actually a little bit switched off to it, but can I just take issue with something you said, Ray? Because you said this is no longer a debate, and I don't think that's true. I think we do need to continue to have a debate about this, because for me, two things are quite striking about the narrative around climate change. One is what's in the IPCC report, what the science is telling us, what the observable data is telling us, and then how it gets spun, and then how it becomes presented on the world stage with our leaders all clapping themselves on the back, telling themselves that they're being great leaders, and how it's spun in the media as well. Now, I've been paying quite close attention to this, and I don't know what net zero by 2030 means. My suspicion is that it means I will pay more to manage on less, and it will be a colder, less brighter future, particularly for those of us who are not, rich and can't offset our global emissions. So I do think we need more debate, and I think actually when people use words like climate emergency means this is too important now to let the little people have a debate on it. So I think some of the language that's used is really kind of anti-democratic. It's not allowing people to have a conversation
what
about
I mean,
it.
that it's not a question open to debate, is that global warming is happening. And until recently, there were people who were saying that it wasn't, or being paid to say that. That's what I meant by that. But certainly we should constantly monitor what we understand about global warming. Of that, I have no doubt.
But go on.
Well, no, I'm glad you said it, so I don't have to. I'd echo that. I think we always need debate. We should never shut debate down, obviously. For me, one of the big stories that's come out of COP26 is hypocrisy. There's this incredible streak of hypocrisy that's run through the previous week. I mean, Bill Gates lectures us about climate change, but he recently bought a private jet airline company. Jeff Bezos descended from space to comment on the thinness of the world's atmosphere. I mean, you almost couldn't make it up. Sky News are blasting incessant climate change coverage at viewers while their CEO commutes transatlantically in a private jet. And Prince Charles told us to get onto a wartime footing, and he's got palaces to go back to and also flies around in private jets. I think it is incredibly difficult for people to relate to any of the serious conversations that are happening when they set an entirely different example. You know, we see them in cavalcades of cars, flying in on private jets, and literally telling people to eat insects while they live very well-heeled, privileged lives. So the hypocrisy is a big story.
I take your point. I think though, if we remember when Greta travelled across the Atlantic in a yacht rather than flying, but ultimately the yacht was made of aluminium and of fiberglass, which were also not good materials. I mean, I think we have, certainly in the way world leaders get to these conferences, we have to cut them some slack. We can't expect the Polynesians to paddle up from the Pacific. But I do agree with you about the hypocrisy of saying one thing and doing another, and Jeff Bezos definitely comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversation between Jeff Bezos and Prince Charles was it was a thing to behold, wasn't it, really? And the other thing that struck me about COP26, which almost no one is talking about, so I'm so glad we get to talk about it tonight, is the fact that Sky and the UK government's Behavioural Insights team co-authored a report about trying to nudge consumer behaviour by increasing their coverage of climate. And, you know, you mentioned before that we've got to be careful not to be anti-democratic in our approach to this. And I thought there was something really quite insidious about this kind of cooked up plan to nudge consumer behaviour by changing news segments and changing dramatic content. It's nothing new. It's happened before.
But I actually think the COP26 has been a great triumph for democracy.
Do you?
Yeah, we had 120 world leaders sent there by their nations. And interestingly, the two countries in the world that absolutely repressed democracy were absent because they can't face the voice of the people actually criticising or judging their leadership. There's no mistake that Xi Jinping didn't make an appearance because he is terrified of being seen to be weak or criticised on the world stage. These are total autocrats who impose their will on their people. So, to me, COP26 is actually a success of democracy, even to the protests outside. I mean, they're definitely part of the story.
You see, I would argue that it kept the people out. You know, COP26 didn't involve the governments are having conversations with each other. I mean, I watched a whole series of kind of commitments that were made before COP26, and every single leader praised every other leader about great leadership. Okay, so it was a proper kind of, you know, affirmations. Look in the mirror and tell yourself you're brilliant. Yep. But they haven't really had that conversation with the people. Yep. And I thought it was real damn cheek of Boris Johnson, who, let's face it, is only in government because of a referendum, to laugh off the idea that we should have a referendum. Now, I think, to be perfectly honest, I've got no idea what the outcome of that referendum would be, and I don't think that matters. I think what matters is that we would be having the conversation and reaching decisions collectively.
I agree with you. I think that's very interesting. But despite, I mean, I think, as I said, Greta Thunberg has been pushed out, you know, not really welcomed into the debate, but they can't escape her voice because the people are actually they're looking now with greater scrutiny than ever before. I mean, the one thing that worries me is that the politicians can make a decision today, safe in the knowledge that they won't be around when the ramifications of that decision actually come to fruition.
Well, I tell you what I'm interested in as one of the people, and that's what it's all going to cost, which they haven't actually ever revealed. So there was leaked government documents that said it could cost the average household £700 a year till 2050. I'd be amazed if it's only that little. And I think part of the reason China and Russia aren't there is because they also know that poverty kills, and they don't want to stop using fossil fuels and to immiserate people further, you know, to the disadvantage of the economy. And I think there's nothing democratic about the fact that we've never voted on net zero and we don't even know what it's going to cost us. No,
I agree with you about the cost. And I worry that people may try to tax us on the back of green changes maliciously. And I think, but what is exciting to me is that the youth of the world are waking up to these issues. They are taking an interest in a way that perhaps they haven't for generations.
I mean, I think that's true, but I think Laura raises quite an interesting point about poverty. So 2021, we know that there have been 6,000 climate-related deaths. Now, that's 6,000 deaths too many. But we also know that there's been 1.5 million deaths from tuberculosis. There's been 3.5 million deaths from malnutrition. That's 6 million, not 6,000. So actually, when we're talking about poverty, my main concern is when you're talking about China and Russia and Brazil and India not meeting their carbon emissions. Whatever we think of the government, that might mean that their people are more impoverished by the fact that they're not allowed to develop in the way Western countries have developed.
I'm heartened, though, by the fact that so many countries are actually getting together and talking. And I don't see why that couldn't extend to debates about other issues, such as world poverty, issues to do with cleanliness or hygiene issues, and illness. And let's keep our fingers crossed that there are some leaders there with the wisdom to look beyond just COP26. This is a time we live in, I think, where we've never had a greater challenge to the world's leadership. It's a fascinating time. I think we need to watch carefully. After the break, the end of the first week of COP. But is a serious discussion to help carbon emissions or just happening, or is it just blah, 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 just people talking shop? But first, here's the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
As we've just been talking about this week, hundreds of world's leaders mostly flew in out of Glasgow to attend the COP26 climate summit. Earlier today, thousands of protesters marched through the city and others to demand more action on climate change. COP26 is being seen as critical because it's the moment at which countries must set out more ambitious goals for climate action 5 years on from the Paris Agreement. But there are two elephants in the room: Russia and China. Joining me from Glasgow is Heather Mackay from E3G, which is an independent European climate change think tank.
Hello, Ray. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Tell me, what's happening up there at the moment?
I mean, it's a flurry of activity up here at the moment, which is nice for me on two fronts, given that I work in climate change and also I'm from this neck of the woods. So we've seen today, as you've pointed out, a huge number of people putting their boots on the streets to call for further and faster ambition and action on climate change. In accompaniment to this, we've seen over, I think, 50,000 people come to the SEC Centre in Glasgow to put the hours in up until 2 a.m. every single night to try and move the dial on climate action as well.
Now, China has sent some delegates to COP26, but what is their actual commitment?
So China's committed to achieve peak emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2060. And I think we shouldn't underestimate how significant it is for China to have come out and made that announcement earlier in the year. Yes, there are issues, and yes, we still need to work them out. But I think what's evident is global leaders are waking up and smelling the coffee on climate change. They know they have to act because their people want them to.
But Russia hasn't sent any delegates. At some point, the world and Russia have got to talk about these issues.
Yes, they do. And again, that is a disappointment, but it doesn't at all negate the value of COP26 this year. I think that we need to remember, as you said in your intro, the particular moment that Glasgow holds in the global climate conversation as the stocktake COP. This is the COP where countries are coming together to stop and reflect on where we've got to date and ramp up ambition for the next period of action. And I think we're starting to see that. We've seen a huge amount of capital now pledged to green projects. We've seen amazing deals like the South Africa deal come out with billions and billions of pounds going to help transition their economy away from coal and towards renewable energy. And we've also seen, frankly, groundbreaking statements on global methane reductions and deforestation. Yes, the proof is in the pudding. And yes, it's all about delivery. And that's what the people on the streets will be saying. But I think it's important to remember how far we've come and where we're at to date.
So what would you say to Greta Thunberg, who stood yesterday and pronounced it a failure and greenwashing?
I would say that her anger and the anger of activists and young people around the world is justified. They should be angry because their future is the one that's at stake. And it's appalling that we haven't acted more swiftly and more decisively on climate to date. However, I would say that COP26 is not a failure. COP26 has focused global attention on one of the biggest crises of our time. And I think, as I've just outlined, we've seen a number of successes come out of this COP. I do think, however, that the next phase is delivery and building trust. If we don't build trust, then we're going to continue to see anger on the streets. So governments really have to listen to what people are saying. So
one of my worries is that, of course, there's been so much coverage this week that the general public watching may be suffering from COP26 exhaustion. What should they take away from what has been achieved so far?
So I think there's a number of amazing announcements that have come out from COP, including the deforestation pledge and the methane pledge by global governments across the world. But what I really want people to take away is it's important to use your voice and speak up. We need to be speaking about climate change, and we need to be using our money, using our investments, and using our votes to show governments that we mean business on our calls for climate action.
I find the whole thing fascinating. What do you think it's going to mean for the average householder, though? What will it cost for them to go green? Do you have any ideas on that?
So I was listening into your conversation previously with a bit of interest. I think that it's really important we move away from the cost narrative towards the investment narrative. Yes, governments and taxpayers are going to have to invest up front in new forms of energy, new forms of transportation and new forms of buildings. But what that's going to result in is a greener, safer world, warmer homes, cheaper bills that aren't volatile and reliant on gas prices, which are going to continue to rise. And also, a number of studies have shown that by investing in net zero now, we're going to create more jobs and we're going to create more productivity across the country. So I think, yes, I'm not steering away from the point that we will have to invest up front, but we're going to get a huge return on that capital.
I can see that there'll be a return and that we need to invest in technology in the long term. What concerns me is that people may be taxed into making decisions on technology that isn't yet ready to deliver what we need from it. New forms of heating that perhaps don't warm houses sufficiently, electric cars when there isn't an infrastructure yet to actually supply sufficient electricity to charge those cars. And then we have the hidden cost. Where does that electricity come from?
Mm-hmm. So I actually think that a number of studies have come out and shown, one I could point to recently is that investing in very straightforward products like warmer homes and energy efficiency will actually save households money in the long runs on their bill. I would say that actually 50% of our emissions reductions can also come from technology that exists today and is proven to work. So we need to be scaling those up and installing those pieces of technology now. On the innovation front, yes, you're right, it's a complicated picture. But I think that as long as we have this overarching mission of investing in green and moving away from fossil fuels, the private sector and investors and business can play their role with clear policy signals and public support, public investment support, to try and innovate and bring us new products that actually will work to deliver net zero across a variety of sectors in the UK.
I hear you. I'm still worried that it's actually going to take money from the pocket of the average householder. And my ultimate concern is that if that is too big a price, we may actually lose the support of the very people we need the support of most.
It's really important that we hold these two ideas in our head, that in order to achieve a climate safe world, it has to be a world that's fair and inclusive too. And so it's really important, I completely agree, that when we think about the world of tomorrow, we think about how that impacts the poorest and most vulnerable across the world, in our country and other countries too. However, I do think that those households will benefit in the long run. It won't cost them, it'll be a benefit. And again, that's through things like warmer homes and cheaper bills.
I wonder how we're going to manage to actually bring the average person along with us on this journey.
Yes, I also wanted to bring up the point that was quite rightly raised about hypocrisy not helping. We need to see those in power, those making decisions on climate change, actually walking the talk themselves on climate action too. And I think that that's incredibly important if we are to maintain trust and maintain support for net zero. However, I think it's not too much in risk in actual fact, given that we see that young people across the world are increasingly demanding that the companies that they go and work for are green and sustainable. The data is showing up in the polls as well across many countries in the world. And people are clever, people can see the impacts of climate change on their doorstep. I'm a Scottish person, and I have to say I've been suffering from the slightly increased temperatures up here over the last year. So if you want to save the Scottish, I think you have to act on climate change.
How important do you think it was that President Biden attended?
I think President Biden attending COP26 was incredibly important. And it really marks the change in the US's position on coming together with countries across the world to collaborate on net zero and on climate change. I think that America is a huge player in the climate change market. They're also a leader in technology, they're a leader in investment, they're a leader in diplomacy. And so for Biden to come to the COP and reaffirm America's commitment to being back on the game and getting us to 1.5 is huge. So a number of things this COP have been really heartening to see.
Heather, thank you so much for joining us from Glasgow, and I wish you all the best with that heavy schedule of meetings that you've got on this week. Coming up, housing. After the break, should we encourage the retired to downsize to help first-time buyers and families?
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years, and I've made lots of friends, and I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3, every Saturday and Sunday.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
A report this week said that the average price of a house in the UK is now £250,000. Many housing experts say that it's actually much higher. Meanwhile, Housing Minister Chris Pincher said older people who are rattling around in their large homes will be encouraged to downsize to free up space for first-time buyers who want to start families. Here's property expert Russell Quirk. Good evening, Russell. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ray. Good evening.
If we look at the average house price first, is £250,000 really the correct figure, or is it higher?
It depends on the index, to be honest. There are so many house price indexes now, from the likes of the Halifax and the Nationwide and Rightmove, and of course they all use different methodologies. Actually, the latest number, which was just yesterday from the Halifax, is that it's about 270,000. It depends how you measure it, frankly, you know, whether you measure on completions or whether you measure asking price, which Rightmove does. And all of those indexes, unfortunately, tend to have a bit of a bias. So the Halifax is weighted towards the north, the Nationwide is weighted towards the south, basically where those companies have branches, because, of course, those indexes are based on mortgage applications. But it also... Their indexes are predicated around mortgage applications. So, of course, the Nationwide and the Halifax house price indexes don't gauge the price of homes that people that are not requiring a mortgage are buying. So it's sketchy, frankly.
How are first-time buyers ever going to afford to buy a house at £250,000?
Well, look, here's the thing. So I have a view that house prices in the relative terms, and I'll say that again, in relative terms, are affordable. Now, let me give you the statistics first of all. So when it comes to first-time buyers make up 30% of all purchases right now, and that's amongst the highest percentage of first-time buyer mix that the country has ever seen. So it's not as if we're seeing a drastic reduction in first-time buyers because of unaffordability. 50% of mortgages are from first-time buyers. So I don't think the data, the statistics actually prove in any way that first-time buyers are kind of hard pushed. And my rationale, my reasoning as to why that might be is because we talk a lot about house price ratio, so house price to wages. And of course, that has extended and extended over the years. So back in the day, you would typically see house prices at about 4 times wages. Now across the UK, it's 8 times. In London, it's 14 times. So it sounds scarily unaffordable until you factor in interest rates. Now, of course, if a mortgage is at 2% because bank base is so low, as opposed to 20 years ago, as you and I remember, much, much higher. The affordability is frankly much, much better.
Surely this is the beginnings of another interest rate crisis in the future, because interest rates are certainly at some point going to go up. Are we going to see households all over the country overextended because they've been encouraged to take out mortgages they can't afford?
No, I think that's about to be probably a great headline in the Daily Express over the next few days and weeks, frankly. But I don't buy that, no. Particularly as the mortgage regulations that were introduced some years ago actually now stress test. So the lenders have to prove a stress test on every mortgage application. And basically what that stress test is to say, if interest rates were to increase, as they're no doubt about to, can you afford that increase? Look, let's be clear. We're talking about maybe 0.25% interest rate hike. So from 0.1 to 0.35, even if it goes to 0.5%, even 1% rate, that's nothing like we've seen historically over the last 20 or 30 years.
Okay, let me bring in the panellists here to see what they think. What do you think? Are you worried about first-time buyers being overextended? Laura?
I think it could become more of a problem in years to come because, national insurance increases. We've got income tax, capital gains, inheritance tax, thresholds fixed. There's going to be fiscal drag. RPI was 4.8% in August. The affordability is going to be affected by how much more expensive life is. So I do feel for first-time buyers, and I think that something like 10 billion is going to be borrowed from first-time buyers from their parents over the next year. And, the bank of mum and dad is one of the biggest banks for first-time buyers now. And the other thing is that homes are earning more than people because house prices have gone up more than earnings have gone up.
Let's see what Russell has to say about that. So the bank of mum and dad is already very overextended, Russell.
Well, the Bank of Mum and Dad, if it were a bank, would actually be one of the top 10 high street banks for mortgage lending in the country. But that doesn't mean it's overextended because, of course, the reason that mum and dad and indeed gran and granddad can lend money to their children and grandchildren is because their houses have gone up in value. And look, it's not a
Russell, we've lost you there for a minute. We'll try and get you back. What do you think of that, Mo?
Well, I think we've been storing up this problem for a long time because we haven't been building enough houses. So since the 1970s, we've been building around about 160,000 houses per year, whereas the demand is 270,000. So we haven't even been meeting demand. In a sense, I don't mind whether that's kind of private housing or whether it's social housing. Social housing is something we don't talk about enough. In a way, it doesn't matter where the stock comes from, but we just don't have enough houses for people to live in. We've got all sorts of planning regulations that prevent people from building on the green belt, for instance. And I was really shocked to hear that the built environment in the UK, the amount of land that we've actually built on is less than the amount of land that's revealed when the tide comes in.
Really?
Did you know that? I mean, that's a report from the European Union several years ago.
I'm going to intervene here. I think the green belt's really important. And I think
might.
Last year we saw that more cleanly than ever in that gave psychological respite for people who were trapped in their homes. What interests me is that there are many areas that are being built on gratuitously where we're building lots of blocks of flats on postage stamp size bits of land, but not supporting those with schools or doctor surgeries or the necessary parking that those families will need. So where building is taking place, it's overly concentrated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But isn't that the point, is if you're trying to constrain urban sprawl, as they call it, that you end up with really concentrated parts of the world. I mean, I live in suburbia and I enjoy the most beautiful walks with my dogs in the morning. It's housing, but there's lots of green space, and it was a planned city. It was a kind of town planned in the 1970s. We've lost that vision to do that, to kind of make housing beautiful, affordable and plentiful.
In fact, in those areas which were planned in that way in the past, they're now being destroyed. And I've witnessed this very clearly. But I think Russell is back with us. Russell, the Housing Minister has said 4 in 10 homes are too big for their owners, and he's encouraging retired people to downsize and make way for first-time buyers. Do you think he's right?
Undoubtedly, there are people that are older that have owned homes for a long time where those houses now presumably are too big because their families have flown the nest. I do think it's an odd thing for Chris Pincher to say, though, when older people in Middle England with, as homeowners are Conservative voters. So that does seem a rather odd thing for him to say politically. But look, the question is what we do about that. What I hope we're not getting to is some kind of socialist approach to trying to penalise homeowners that have paid off their mortgages, have paid tax to buy that house in the first place, and then as a consequence of trying to get them to move, are now going to be penalised through the tax system. What we should be seeing is incentive. Now, what I'd suggest is that when it comes to stamp duty, which is an onerous and penal and hideous tax, frankly, particularly on the southeast, that actually the government should relinquish stamp duty for downsizers. And that would free up that stock and enable families to trade up because they can afford to, but otherwise would encourage people to trade down.
So where do these people move to? Where do they trade down to?
Well, effectively, they'd be swapping, wouldn't they? So you can imagine being a growing family in a 3-bedroom semi that needs a bigger home. Well, the homes they want are those that are lived in by the people that you just characterised. So, of course, for that to take place, you need incentive.
This starts to sound like Russia to me, where people have to agree to move houses, swap houses.
It's incentive. I mean, no, it's incentive. It's not dictate. It's the opposite. The opposite.
I mean, the Englishman's home is his castle, and it feels like it's being chopped away out, piece by piece. Something the government are taking their cut left, right, and centre from the mortar to bring it down around their ears.
But I'm actually saying that it shouldn't be penal and it shouldn't be based on something that's done through the tax system. It should be incentivised. That's a Conservative principle, not a socialist, not a left-wing principle. Right.
What interests me is the role of the planning laws and planning associations and offices in the provision for the future. What role do they have in determining what properties are available for purchase in their areas?
So look, it's planning. It's a very, very good point, and one that often is kind of constructed as a reason that there's a choke point when it comes to supply of housing. Now, actually, the biggest 10 developers, so the big house builders, the big listed house builders, they collectively have around 700,000 land plots that they currently own right now that they do not produce housing on because they choose to keep them back and drip feed out about 100 to 120,000 built plots a year. Why do they do that? Because, of course, they don't want to open the floodgates to supply, because although it's probably the right thing to do in terms of demand, particularly for social housing, of course, it might drive prices down, which then would affect their profit and loss on their shareholders. So planning is not the problem, Ray. So planning, there are hundreds of thousands of plots with planning permission that developers simply choose not to build out. The problem is our entire housing supply system for retail homes, if you like, but also social housing, is at the behest of just 10 boards of directors that relate to 10 house builders in this country. And that, no wonder we end up with an ebb and flow and not enough properties, because it's not controlled by anybody apart from 10 companies.
What would you say to them? What would be your advice to them?
Well, you can't give advice to a public limited company that's only existence is to create value for its shareholders. They're doing the right thing. You know, morally, okay, we could all argue from the left and the right that they should do more to kind of feed more properties into the system, but commercially they're doing the right thing. What the government needs to do is to take this by the scruff of the neck and start building houses themselves, cut out the developers, not entirely, but compete with the developers. And of course, there's so much empty government land, about 180,000 hectares of land that's owned by by the Ministry of Defence, local authorities and so on, that these homes, if someone put their mind to it, could be built for the right people in the right places at the right time. Government needs to get its act together on housing. It hasn't done so since the 1950s.
And what's your opinion on Greenbelt? We saw the government some years ago to say with one hand we believe in preserving the Greenbelt, and then at the same moment handing over responsibility for decisions, planning decisions on Greenbelt to local authorities.
You can't not give that discretion to local authorities because, of course, elected members that are representing those local people are the ones that sit on planning committees and make those decisions. The question is, which parts of the Greenbelt, 50 years after it was incepted, are actually green? Now, I've seen in my career as a planning consultant, as an agent and a housing developer, lots and lots of instances where industrial estates and scrapyards are refused planning permission because they're in the Greenbelt, even though they are decrepit, dilapidated, toxic sites. So I think actually what we need to solve the problem of building in the Greenbelt is to actually do a root and branch, no pun intended, re-evaluation of the entire Greenbelt system, because I suspect a lot of it is not very green at all.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to agree with you on that one, Russell. I think that what we've seen is chipping away at the Greenbelt to create exactly those circumstances. And I suspect, certainly seeing the protests today on environmental issues, that this could become a very, very big debate to be had in the country. And, you know, Britain's supposed to be in a green and pleasant land, and we can't live just on concrete. I'm going to ask Laura, what do you think on this?
I think it's quite astonishing for the government to take the position that they should tell people when to sell their house and what sort of house to live in. People have worked all their life paying into the system, income tax, stamp duty, etc. They should live in the house that they want to live in, that they've earned the money for. It's just incredible. I mean, sure, put incentives in their way, like Russell pointed out with stamp duty. That's one way to incentivise people to downsize, but it's just not the government's place to tell people to downsize.
Russell, thank you very much. It's obviously a debate with a lot of mileage still to run in it, and a very important one. After the break, well, meet this week's Great Briton, someone who's done something outstanding for somebody else. Stay with us, but first, here's the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Don't forget, you can send us your views on any of tonight's stories by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews. Now it's that time of the show where we meet one of Britain's great Britons. It's a person who's done something outstanding for another person or people. This week, we're joined by Craig Wellstead, who was one of the co-founders of the Dons Local Action Group. Welcome, Craig.
Hello.
Craig, tell us what it is that the Dons Local Action Group actually does.
The Dons Local Action Group was founded by 3 AFC Wimbledon supporters in March last year, basically to help with COVID, those self-isolating, shielding, couldn't get any food deliveries from supermarkets with no one to come around and help them with food and stuff like that. And within weeks and weeks, we've raised 2,000 volunteers outside 22 supermarkets, volunteers from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening, outside on the table, collecting food, getting it back to distribution hubs, and volunteer drivers getting it out to those who needed it.
Wow, I mean, that's a big commitment from your volunteers. Those are long days. Where do you find these volunteers?
Well, the story started with Wimbledon, a meeting in December 2019. AFC Wimbledon were £11 million short of funding their stadium. So the supporters got together in January and we started the Plough Lane Bond. Within 5 or 6 weeks, we raised £5.4 million to help save the stadium. Therefore, we've got a group of volunteers already set in place for when we decided to help with COVID. So we already had a volunteer army sorted out already. We started at the Old Rutlishan Sports Club in Merton Park, which is a community-based club. So in the community, rather football fans spread, all over the country, we had a nucleus of volunteers in certain areas in the community. So those all local, knew everybody. They could all go to local stores and support getting the food for the people who needed it.
Craig, can we send you up to Glasgow? Because, 2,000 supporters, that's amazing. Clearly, your organisation has an astonishing organisational skills.
It's a strange thing, really, because the community helped us raise the money for the stadium, and within 1 or 2 weeks, suddenly we're helping the community. But it wasn't even trying. People just coming to us, helping. You also got to remember, in lockdown, people couldn't get out unless they was helping. If you was a key worker? A volunteer was a key worker outside a supermarket. A volunteer was a key worker delivering food to somebody's house who couldn't get any food for 6 weeks from any of the supermarkets because all the deliveries were, full up.
But how did people find you? How did you let people know that you were there and that you could help them?
It was social media. I'm on no social media whatsoever, but everyone was all over social media. And suddenly we got numbers. We was outside, within 2 weeks we was at 3 supermarkets. Within about 8 weeks we was outside 22. We didn't, I can say this on air, I presume. We didn't ask at any single supermarket whether we was allowed there. We just turned up with volunteers and tables at 6 o'clock in the morning, putting the tables down, walking along the queues, asking for the food that was required. for the food boxes, we had no idea. So basically, Age UK, when we first started, went to Age UK and asked them, what does an average food box consist of? And we used that and worked from there.
That's amazing. It's mind-boggling. So basically, you just decided you'd do it.
Yeah, pretty much. Because that's what basically, if you know the story of AFC Wimbledon, that's what you do. Just fight adversity all the time. It's weird. I'm humbled by our volunteers. When you look at the figures and the stats that we've done, you step back in amazement. We started out, we'll just do this and help people during COVID. Now we've moved to food poverty. Now, since we started on the 21st of March, we've delivered over nearly 200,000 food boxes. And this year alone, now because obviously we've got more professional, we've got data and stats that confirm this. But since the 1st of January this year, we've given out over £1 million worth of food to those that need it, whether it be food banks, any organisations, social services refer families to us and individuals to us, and we get food to them within about an hour and a half.
An hour, that's amazing. And is there anything you need at the moment?
Volunteers. We always need volunteers. If you live in Worton, Wandsworth or Kingston, and you would have gone to a supermarket, you would see people outside on tables collecting food. The old history and stories of charities was a basket in a supermarket, and you threw an old tin.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Threw a tin in, and it was just left.
I have to tell you, I'm so impressed with you and the people of Wimbledon. Well done and keep it up. Thank you very much. It's 8 o'clock. Let's take a look at the latest news headlines with Karen Roberts.
Thank you, Ray. Here are your latest headlines. Thousands of people have marched through Glasgow calling for more action to tackle climate change at the UN summit. It's part of the COP26 coalition's Global Day of Action for Climate Justice. Demonstrations took place across the UK, including in Nottingham, Cardiff, Belfast, Manchester and London. At the Glasgow climate protest, police fenced in around 70 members of the Young Communist League. Labour MP Zara Sultana was at the London protest. She said world leaders have not made strong enough commitments so far.
So far, what's coming out of COP doesn't go far enough. There have been some policy announcements coming out around coal, but not everyone's even signing up to that. And coming from messaging that's coming out of the streets outside from Greta Thunberg and others, calling it a greenwash, a festival for the global north to just do PR.
There are some flashing images in this next story. Rapper Travis Scott has said that he's devastated after at least 8 people died in a crowd surge at a festival in Houston, Texas. The incident, which left several others injured, happened while the rapper was performing at the Astroworld Festival on Friday evening. 17 people were taken to hospital, including 11 people who were in cardiac arrest. Mr. Scott pledged total support to the police investigation. At least 99 people have been killed after an oil tanker exploded near to Sierra Leone's capital. It happened after a bus struck the tanker in Freetown. A giant fireball could be seen burning in the night sky. President Julius Maada Bio, who's in Scotland attending COP26, called it a horrendous loss of life. People will be able to book their COVID-19 booster jabs 5 months after their second dose from Monday. Currently, boosters can only be booked after 6 months, but the booking system is changing next week to speed up the rollout of the jabs ahead of winter. People will still only receive the vaccine 6 months after their second dose. The husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been on hunger strike outside the Foreign Office in Westminster for 2 weeks now. Richard Ratcliffe criticised Prime Minister Boris Johnson for his cold decision to allow Iran to keep detaining Britons. His wife, Nazanin, a British-Iranian dual national, has been in custody in Iran since 2016 after being accused of plotting to overthrow the government there. Mr. Ratcliffe said a candlelit vigil attended by around 70 people last night gave him morale to keep going. He intends to continue the strike until at least the middle of next week.
Generally, I'd like him to take responsibility. He is in charge of the government, he's in charge of all the government's decisions. It is a cold decision to let the government's debt lead to British citizens being held hostage, including Nazanin. What I'd like him to be saying to the Iranian delegation is that this can't go on. We have to solve it, we have to find a way.
You're right up to date. Now back to Ray Mears.
The first wild beaver colony to live on an English river for 400 years could be threatened by raw sewage spills that can cause serious health problems. Wildlife experts are warning sewage works in Honiton made spills 137 times last year, reveals Devon Wildlife Trust. The River Otter is the site of the official beaver trial reintroduction. In a statement, the Devon Wildlife Trust said, "Pollution into any river or stream is a serious issue. The UK's rivers are in a deplorable state. Clean watercourses are vital for the people and communities who live alongside them, as well as for the wildlife that they support." The River Otter in East Devon supports a population of beavers. This is despite recent and historical releases into it of sewage and other pollutants from other sources such as runoff from farmland. We will continue to monitor the local beaver population to see if there's a detectable impact from recent incidents. Meanwhile, South West Water, which is the water provider for the area, said looking after the environment was its top priority and that it was focused on reducing pollution through its upstream Thinking Catchment Management programme. It said there are many wild living beavers across the rivers throughout the southwest. As they are expanding to new territories, we are totally committed to the sustainable management of wild living beavers and supporting their habitats due to the multiple potential beneficial impacts beavers can have on rivers. We show this commitment through our attendance at multiple regional management groups for beavers, and we proudly financially support the Tamar Beaver Management Group, which exists to help landowners and river stakeholders with the challenges wild living beavers can sometimes present. Joining us now is Ashley Smith, who's the chairman of the Windrush Against Sewage campaign. Good evening.
Hi there.
It seems that everybody's telling us that they're concerned. What's really going on?
Well, I've heard that. I've heard those numbers. That's a terrible amount of untreated sewage. I mean, that number indicates that there's a really serious problem at Honiton. You're talking about roughly the equivalent of about 3 months of untreated sewage going into the River Otter. And that's way over the sort of threshold of it only happening in exceptional circumstances to stop people's homes from flooding. That's much more indicative of a huge lack of investment, which we know exists right across the water industry.
Yeah, there's an old saying, isn't there, that dilution is the solution to pollution. But as we've seen from COP26, that doesn't wash anymore.
No, I think the dilution is going into the legislation, and that's what we fear now with the Environment Bill. We've actually got very good law that we could apply right now. It's strangled by government policy, which has really made pollution the profitable activity. And you can't blame private industry, which are the companies are actually monopolies. You can't blame them for exploiting the obvious way to make money. And I've heard plenty of admissions, including from senior water industry executives, that sweating the assets is the model that they've applied, which means cutting corners, basically.
I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it, that in Parliament recently MPs were criticised for failing to support an environmental bill that would place legal duties on companies to reduce discharges.
it was a real turning point, because that really fired public opinion up to realise that they had the choice, and easily we could get the investment back into the industry if only the government would bring in clear legislation. There's another vote on Monday. The same thing's going to come up. But we fear that once again, then we'll end up with the weakened version, and we won't have the clear guidelines that we even know the water industry wants. They want to be told what to do, because they know they've got to do it. There's no corner cutting. They have to get the money in. And we know from the water industry people we meet, the professionals, they can do a great job, and they want to do a great job. It's just that kind of failure of regulation, and that could so very easily be changed.
I mean, it is easy to be part of a campaign which has the backing of the public to call for cleaner rivers, but how would you solve the problem? Dare I say it, what's the solution?
Well, basically, earlier in the year, DEFRA, the government admitted that there had been a lack of investment over decades. So the water industry's taken out about £60 billion profit. Now we're talking about, it's like not servicing your car for 10 years. You're going to get a big bill eventually, or you're going to have to spend some money. And this is the point we're at. So it is all about, a lot of it is about fixing broken pipes. There's a lot of blame shifted onto the Victorians. Let's be honest, it's not their fault. They couldn't predict our stupidity. And actually, if you look at somewhere like Honiton, take a look on the satellite image. You won't see a lot of Victorian houses there. A lot of this has been about development that took place in the 50s up till around about now. And it's that corner cutting, expecting an infrastructure that's been now in private hands for over 30 years to have healed itself. So it never received the investment it needed. And this is where we are. So it needs an injection of cash. But that's possible. Otherwise, what is the point of privatisation if you cannot bring investment in? And the bill payer can pay maybe a bit more, but not the numbers that anywhere near the numbers that have been used to frighten the public.
Just a few minutes ago, we were talking about house building, and clearly, that's also putting pressures on our river. I'm just going to ask our panellists what they think. Laura, what do you make about this issue? I mean, the river we're talking about here, the River Otter, I know it very well. It's absolutely stunning. It's a beautiful river.
I just couldn't believe that only 14% of our rivers are in good ecological health. Now, obviously, this is about the wildlife. It's a big, complex issue as well, but it's also about us. So the Environment Agency Chief of Staff said in response to, rivers safe to swim in. Rivers aren't for humans, they're for the wildlife, they're not for human swimming. And I was really shocked, because I think that, for a start, that would be like a measure of how safe and clean it is. And why shouldn't rivers be for people to swim in? I don't want to bring it to a kind of selfish point of view, but I like river swimming. I did a lot of river swimming last summer, and I'm lucky enough to be 20 minutes down the road from lovely rivers, the River Wey, if you know it. And there were so many people using the rivers during lockdown because it gave you this glorious sense of freedom and connection with nature. And now I'm wondering what I might have swallowed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Last year, people engaged with nature in a way they hadn't for decades.
Yeah.
And now they're starting to look with their own eyes, to feel on their skin if things aren't clean, and they're starting to pay attention to this.
But I thought it was just... I used to live in a place where the water ran orange, and I wouldn't let my dog... She was desperate. She's a Labrador, Ray. You know what Labradors are like? See a river, they want to be in it. And I wouldn't let her go in it because it was orange. And I thought it was just a localised problem to do with pollution in the environment. And I did live in not a particularly wealthy area, but then when you find out, like you said, only 14% are actually fit for, never mind humans, what about the Labradors, Laura? That's what I say.
Even more important.
It's quite shocking when you look at it.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, clean water is everything, isn't it? It's one of those vital requirements for life. And you have such beautiful water down in Devon. The thought that somebody would spill sewage into that untreated is just appalling.
It's across the country. It's everywhere you look. If you look at the Rivers Trust map, if you put "Is my river fit to play in" into the internet, you'll see a map of your area, and you'll see how much untreated sewage goes in all over the country. It's unnecessary. The idea that rivers are only for wildlife. Well, hang on a minute. How are we treating that wildlife exactly? Do they don't get a text to say, "Get out the river. There's a whole bunch of untreated sewage coming."
I'm also reminded of the news that came out about the river that passes through the Glastonbury Festival being so polluted by MDMA and cocaine that it was affecting the reproduction of eels, allegedly. Anyway. We have to take proper care of our water, don't we? That's the bottom line in this message. How can people pay more regard to this?
Well, I think people can definitely think about what they put down their toilet. It's not a bin, it's a toilet. Also, you can look at some of the labelling of the things you buy. Some of them, they ought to be stopped at source, but they're labelled unsuitable to go into rivers. They're harmful to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. What on earth are we doing putting that stuff into our waters anyway? Plus, we know that every 100 houses will bring roughly 30 tonnes of extra sewage per day to a system that's already overflowing. So I think the investment needs to get ahead of the demand, because the water industry is basically ready to take the money, but it's not ready to deliver the service. So I think the tipping point is all about public opinion, because when you tell people about this, they're shocked and horrified. And it is a voting issue. It's starting to trouble government that people are surprisingly upset that their rivers are being used as a toilet, and it's not safe.
This is very much on the agenda, isn't it? So fingers crossed that people start to actually take an interest and make their voices heard. Thank you very much. I wish you the very best down in Devon. Now, from our planet to a galaxy far, far away, astronomers believe they've spotted the first extragalactic exoplanet 28 million light years away. So how did they find it? It's been named the Whirlpool, Galaxy M51, and how it was found is a major development in how astronomers explore parts of space that can't be seen by a telescope. Thanks to NASA for providing this animation. To talk about its significance, I'm joined now by space expert Andrew Lound. How excited are you about this discovery?
Good evening. Absolutely staggering discovery for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's possibly they've discovered a planet in another galaxy. That in itself is quite staggering. The staggering thing is the achievement to actually do it. When you think about, when you look at a galaxy, especially M51, which it is, it's a big whirlpool of stars, and all that bright light is coming away. And what you're doing is you're picking out one tiny speck from all that, from this distance. It's quite fantastic. With white light, you can't do it, because it's got to be all merged together. So this has actually been discovered by using detecting the X-rays which are coming, possibly from a neutron star interacting possibly with a black hole. And stars generally can give out X-rays anyway. Our star gives out lots of X-rays, but they're more localized. So what you end up with is you end up with the planet passing in front of the star and blocking out the X-rays, where the light, the X-rays either dim or go out altogether. And that you time how long that takes. And when it clears, what you end up with, you've got a figure of how long it took for an object to block the light. I can do it actually easier with you with a torch here. This is the starlight, and if it's shining towards you, you've got a planet, and it passes in front of it, and it dims and goes bright again. That's what you're measuring. And in this case, it was X-rays they were measuring. And they found out because the X-rays went totally out, you get a really accurate measurement of a planet the size of Saturn, twice the distance of our Saturn is from our sun, from this parent star. And that is a fantastic thing, because it's showing us now that planets exist around other stars in other galaxies. And what's important about that is, it means our galaxy isn't particularly unique on having these things. I know you could say, well, it's a bit common sense, really. But not in science. We have to have evidence for it.
So it's actual proof, you know for certain.
Well, what we need to do is see the observation again, and that's where, unfortunately, it goes a bit wrong, because the star is orbiting at a slight angle as we see it, and it won't pass in front of its star, planet, won't pass in front of its star again for another 70 years. So we may have to wait another 70 years to confirm this one. But because the technique works, we can now start to look at other galaxies or other objects within galaxies themselves. And this opens a whole new gamut to actually look at planets, because currently the planets that we're discovering going around other stars are about 3,000 light years away within our galaxy system. while we're looking at further away, it's quite important because everyone's looking for life. I mean, it's the first question everyone's got, what about life on these worlds? Well, if we're looking for life, then we find these planets 3,000 light years away. We're listening to radio signals or perhaps light beams coming from them if they're using a type of laser technology. But if we look further beyond that, we're looking at a planet which is 28 million light years away. That means it took the light of that planet 28 million years to reach us. So that means we're looking back in time, and that opens up a whole big area where life could have started, where there could be intelligent life, which we've missed because now they're probably dead and died out, but their signals could be still on their way to us. So it opens up a whole new realm for us to explore.
It's fascinating. And how do you think this is going to change astronomy?
Well, what's interesting here is the equipment that's been used to do it is absolutely staggering. I mean, it's used two forms. You've got the telescope in orbit, and you've got the European Space Agency, the Chandra X-ray Observatory in orbit, and they're using the Newton Space Telescope, which is European Space Agency's one. So it's a combined effort, which is quite important. But the technique is quite fantastic. I mean, it's great. The technique can be used to do this, but the technique can be used to do all sorts of other discoveries within other galaxies themselves and make comparisons with our own galaxy. And that's really important. And this technology then can be filtered back down to Earth, and there may be some applications we can use for this technology down on Earth. Something that people aren't really quite aware of is that one of the big things in space science is that the technologies that we use generally comes feeding back into society. And especially with COP26 going on at the moment, much of the technology used in space science is green tech, because it's needed to be green tech, because we can't have that kind of pollutant waste product because it's dangerous both for astronauts and the equipment.
It's fascinating. I'm so intrigued. You know, the mysteries of nature, especially in space, are astonishing. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us that lovely demonstration. Still to come, can you be vegan and buy local? But first, here's the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, we're all being encouraged to try a healthier diet. One of them is to become more vegan, friendly for you and friendly for the planet. Or is it? For example, air-transported fruit and vegetables can create more greenhouse gas emissions than some meat. So is the answer to shop locally? Well, that can be more expensive and maybe limited in choice. Here to discuss this is Liz Webster, who's a farmer and the founder and chair of Save British Farming. Good evening, Liz.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for joining us. Can you be vegan and buy locally?
I think it would be difficult to do that all year round. About 2/3 of our farmland here in this country can only support livestock farming. You know, it's only good enough to grow grass, basically. So if we were to provide a vegan diet all year round, we'd have to significantly ramp up greenhouse, capacity, and make dramatic changes, to keep that food local. And the food chain is very complex. It's not as if one part of your farm is only vegetarian. You know, we grow crops, and the crops that are not good enough for the human grade go into the food chain for feeding animals. So upsetting the balance of that is very difficult. Our food system here, our farming system, has been set up over thousands of years. Our country looks like it does because of the way we farmed. And as years have gone on, we've got more and more efficient at making use of the limited space that we've got. So I think about turning it is not the best way to do that.
And if you buy locally, surely you're then going to ask people to be eating effectively seasonally, like we did a long while ago.
Well, yes, or you try and force growing vegetables under glass. But there's also supplements for a vegan diet. It's not straightforward. You know that if you're not eating protein, you've got to supplement that. So there's all sorts of complications around that, as well as just fertilizers, which we're all struggling with at the moment because of the energy crisis. So it's an incredibly complex matter, and I think it's very easy to go, I'm going to save the planet by going vegan, and it's just not that simple. The best way, if people want to be environmentally friendly, the best thing to do is to eat a mixed diet and to eat products which are locally grown and locally produced. If you eat meat, as I do,
I'm going to throw that one over.
You're turning grass into food, which is
I'm going to throw that one over to our panel, if I can. Do you guys agree with that? Do you mixed diet, buy local?
I'm so glad to see Liz on, because during this whole COP26 and all the pressure on people to do 5-2, go vegetarian, go vegan, well, it just doesn't really make sense. Like Liz said, our farming has been established for thousands of years with very low carbon footprint. Almost all of our livestock is grass-fed, outside, outdoor reared. And I've been thinking British farmers should be up in arms about the damage to their business. I mean, one example, at COP26, did you see they had a menu that listed the carbon impact of every food? And I thought, this is the problem with KPIs, key performance indicators. People focus on one thing, and then it's to the detriment of everything else. Well, what about biodiversity? Don't look at that Scottish burger only in terms of carbon, but also what about the British farms? What about the biodiversity, the butterflies that can only live in pastures where animals farm? Ruminants are great for soil, plus meat is good for you.
Mo, what's your view?
Can I just say, I feel quite strongly about this. What we eat has got absolutely nothing to do with whether we're a good or a bad person, OK? This kind of moralising about what you put on your plate and what you want to choose to eat for yourself just drives me slightly insane. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, so, you know, brownie points to me. But I don't feel that that's a moral thing. I think it's a personal thing. And I think that the way we are kind of constantly telling people what to eat, what to say, what to wear, where to fly or not to fly, it's kind of like I was saying earlier, my problem with a lot of the environmental agenda is that it's not looking outwards, it's looking in and modifying our behaviour. It's telling people how to behave, and I find that quite
It's
sinister.
almost becoming religious, you know? It's almost like there's religious values attached to what we eat.
Yes,
It's really zealous.
One of the things that interests me is that in France, a lot of communities are now going organic, pesticide-free. And the French put a very, very high regard on eating locally. They have this term terroir, which means that through their food, they are invested in the health of the local agriculture. Are we seeing any signs of small producers responding to those kind of traits in Britain?
But you're asking me, well, we've got a complicated history in this country, and in France there is certainly a celebration of agriculture in every town, and we've lost that in this country, which is incredibly sad. And you know, part of what we're doing at Save British Farming is trying to focus on getting that back from a local perspective, because this is about our control as democratic citizens, and there's nothing more important than accessing our food and our countryside. And this government says one thing, but really it's greenwashing. You know, these trade deals are going to see huge amounts of food coming in, which has been produced using the worst standards. And that threatens our agriculture.
Yeah. Is it going to be more expensive for people to buy locally?
Well, I mean, everything's going up in price at the moment, and the biggest driver for us in agriculture, as I've mentioned before, is the fertiliser. You know, the price of that has gone up, I don't know, 3- or 4-fold in the last 12 months, and it's continuing to climb. Without fertiliser, you know, our yields will be significantly lower. So eventually those costs are going to have to be passed on. And as I said, that gets more difficult. But what a lot of farmers are trying to do is to get online and offer their products direct to the consumer. So I think if you want to buy locally, go online, find your local farms and see what they're offering. Go to your local butchers and try and, you know, support us as much as you possibly can, because we really need that support right now.
Liz, thank you very much. I know that our farmers do a fantastic job, and there is some amazing produce being produced. And if you can afford it, obviously support your local farmers. Now, when it comes to finding ancient artefacts, this next one is certainly up there for the history geeks amongst us. Archaeologists have uncovered what they're describing as an astounding set of Roman sculptures on the HS2 rail route. 2 complete pieces of what appear to be a man and a woman, plus the head of a child, were found at an abandoned medieval church in Buckinghamshire. Now, the discoveries from the old St Mary's Church in Stoke Mandeville will be sent for specialist analysis. Let's turn to my panel. What do you make of all this? Are you excited by the discovery of these statues?
Yeah, I am. It's a little bit like the exoplanet. It kind of forces you to think about something that's a bit bigger than your own mundane life. Do you know what I mean? I mean, he was talking about travelling back in time by billions of light years or millions of light years anyway. But even that ancient civilizations and how people lived and what we can learn from them, and, you know, sort of gives you perspective on your own life, doesn't it? Especially kind of the last 18 months where we've been a bit introverted. These things inspire me a lot, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When can we go and see them? I studied ancient history, and any kind of Roman excavation's fascinating. But why did they find it in a church doing an HS2 excavation? Are they knocking the church down?
Well, I mean, HS2 cuts a sway through the country, doesn't it? I mean, I'm fascinated. I mean, this extra dimension of this mysterious piece of British history, the Roman period in Britain that disappeared into the Dark Age when the Romans left. It's fascinating, you know, all the extra detail that these sculptures can reveal.
Absolutely, and that's the thing about history, is like it's constantly looking to find the truth, isn't it? Kind of going back over artifacts and pieces of information and piecing it together and kind of really getting to the truth about how people lived, you know. I find it fascinating.
It's an interesting punctuation point at the moment that those are sculptures and they're Roman, because, you know, we've just come out of a year of statues being toppled and a lot of chest beating about our colonial past. People forget that we were colonised, actually quite brutally. Hundreds of thousands of Britons were slaughtered by the Romans. There's the original statues.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, I mean, I can't wait to see what else they find. I mean, it just that HS2 link keeps turning up astonishing finds. After the break, is it too early to be thinking about Christmas? Oh, no, it isn't.
Oh, yes, it is.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
The Royal British Legion is celebrating their centenary, marking 100 years of supporting our armed forces at home and on the battlefield. Our Wales reporter has been to the opening of the Field of Remembrance at Cardiff Castle. It's a tradition that began in 1928 in the grounds of Westminster Abbey. And this year, there are 6 fields across the UK. Lily Hewitson has more.
For the last century, November has been a month of remembrance, and this year is no exception. As we remember those who have lost their lives in conflict, from the First World War to the present day, the Royal British Legion's Field of Remembrance has been opened at Cardiff Castle.
The charitable remit of the Royal British Legion is to keep remembrance alive. Many of us as individuals would have experienced loss in recent conflicts, First and Second World War, grandfathers, fathers, brothers, and obviously in the more recent conflicts as well. So it's really important that us as a nation, we remember that sacrifice and those who have ultimately given the ultimate sacrifice for us and helped shape the world we live in today. When the organisation was founded back in 1921, in the aftermath of what was then known as the Great War, the worst war that the world had ever seen, there was a desperate need for our work and our services. And the fact that we are still here 100 years later, delivering the same services, delivering welfare support, campaigning on behalf of the armed forces, remembering their sacrifice, that sacrifice is going to continue. And actually, we're working with many more younger veterans these days, and they will need our support moving forward. So it's just as important now, remember, as it was back in 1921. My mother lost two of her brothers during the Second World War. One was killed in the Far East and the second one was killed in Italy. My father served himself out in the Far East. I, of course, myself served for a number of years and lost friends and comrades both in accidents and in active conflict. So it's a very personal thing. So I think about those individuals who've given the ultimate sacrifice for us.
I think that, some people confuse this just with the memories of the First World War or the Second World War, where, of course, it's got huge significance. But actually, there's been conflicts in between all of those years, and there are many occasions which I think when you bring the community of Wales and the rest of the UK together to just reflect on the sacrifices that people have made. I think that's important. I think the Royal British Legion do a fantastic job of just getting us all to pause for a moment once a year to respect the families and of people who've made that ultimate sacrifice. So I think it's a really important part of the national calendar. It's not just about the big world wars, which are obviously embedded in people's memories, but every year, almost every month of every year, there are service personnel somewhere in the world, maybe very close to home, as you say, helping with the COVID crisis, doing unbelievable things without much recognition sometimes, often in very dangerous circumstances. So if this is an occasion to just think about that and to reflect on that and to pay them the respect that they deserve, then I think that's a really, it's a fantastic few moments of our time, the sort of thing we should always do.
What do you think about in those 2 minutes of quiet?
It's a really interesting question, that. I mean, I do think about some of my my ancestors, or my grandfathers both fought one in both World Wars and one in the Second World War only, and you do pause and think about that. But actually, it's I thought a lot about the last 18 months and just what the nation has been through, what individuals have been through.
Yes, it is an important time of year, I think, for the armed forces especially, but also I think for the British public, who are very supportive of their armed forces. And I think all the people that have served and people that have been lost over many, many years now, I mean, we've all either got family connections or community connections, and these are all still very important to people, and it is an important time of year to be able to do that. The British Legion have been supporting the armed forces for 100 years, making sure that we are well supported, so I'm sure that will continue, and I'm sure remembrance in its form, and maybe it will change over many years. I think it's changed a little bit down the years, will continue, but I still think it's something quite important to British people. It's something that makes us connect with people that have served before, and so I'm sure it will continue in one form or another. So, I mean, this year we've been doing a lot of commemoration around the Battle of Briton and some of the people from Wales who served, and I was involved in a lot of that sort of historical research with some of our colleagues. So I was actually thinking a little bit about them in particular, but also some colleagues I have served with and some who have lost their lives in recent years as well.
It is an important time of year, isn't it? Our service personnel are quite extraordinary. And I remember when I was growing up, of course, they wore their uniforms in public and we could see them in ordinary life. And recent events, obviously, to do with terrorism, they're not so visible today. So I think this is an important time of year when we can reach out and say thank you to our service personnel. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, I remember my grandfather, my Uncle John and his son all went over to where the fallen, the Battle of the Somme, to pay respect to people of that generation who sacrificed. And what was lovely about that, because my great-grandfather fought in both World Wars, actually, but that was 4 generations. That was a link between 4 generations of eldest sons, actually, which, sorry, I get a bit emotional, but it's that connection to the past, and that, when we were talking about the housing earlier and about, kind of scapegoating retirees, to kind of like swap houses for young people and everything, that continuity between generations and what we build upon and how we connect, not just as families, but as generations, I think is really important. And that, for me, is why remembrance has always been so important.
Yeah. I think it's especially poignant this year. I know we're going to be coming to Christmas, but like Christmas, Remembrance Day last year was very muted. And I think it just feels more moving this year because last year everything was dampened down. And so perhaps this year we just have to remember a bit harder to make up for last year.
I think it's interesting to hear you talk, and remembrance. It's not just about remembering, it's about telling the stories to the next generation so they understand the price that was paid for the freedoms they enjoy today, and why they're so important to fight to preserve.
We don't do enough of that. You're 100% right. Yeah.
Very, very important.
I think that I think even in our education system, there's this kind of politicisation of the way in which we kind of treat history. There's almost always a kind of narrative or an agenda in the way that we teach actually those stories from grandparents to grandchildren, those personal histories, as well as what it meant for them today. Like you say, the freedoms that we enjoy today are due to the sacrifices of our ancestors. And I really feel quite strongly that we don't talk between the generations as much. Certainly as when I grew up, I used to love listening to my grandparents. I mean, sometimes I had to really force them to talk about it because they didn't think our generation would be interested. But they couldn't have been more wrong.
Yep, very much so. Now, is it too early to be thinking about Christmas? John Lewis and Marks & Spencer both released their Christmas advertisements this week. Take a look at the John Lewis ad. And here's the Marks & Spencer advert. Well, does that make you feel Christmassy?
It's the first time I've seen the Marks & Spencer's one, actually. I have to say I like the John Lewis one better. I don't know where they get their child actors from, but they're really cute, aren't they? They're always really good, the child actors in this. Yeah, I am starting to feel a little bit Christmassy. Normally I'm proper, like you say, like really grumpy about Christmas, like too early. We haven't even had fireworks out of the way. But I think people need things to look forward to. And we had such a muted Christmas last year, didn't we?
It was,
And time for family to get together. That, to me, would be very exciting.
Well, it wasn't just muted, it was shattered, basically. I think it was December 20th that Christmas was called off, and I think it was unbelievably cruel. A lot of people by then will have done their Christmas shopping, and think how much that costs so many households, hundreds of pounds on food that they didn't get to share with their family. I was really disappointed to hear the whole Save Christmas line being trotted out again this year, because I think last year it felt a bit like psychological torture. What was it? There was an NHS boss saying, get your booster to save Christmas. I'm like, Christmas is never going to need saving again. It's happening. I can be a little bit muted about Christmas, a bit grinchy, but this year it can't be too early. And so I was looking at when can you put up your Christmas tree? When? And it's not long. It's only 22 days. So it's the Advent, the fourth Advent before Christmas. So that's the 28th of November.
Have you done your shopping yet?
It's not long.
I haven't. I always leave mine to the last minute. I'm actually quite a good Christmas shopper. I work out what I'm going to get everybody, and then I just do a last-minute dash and go and get it all. So
I've started.
I do mine on Christmas Eve usually.
I started to do Christmas stocking shopping today.
But isn't it interesting that people are going back into the shops? That was some of the reports that were out this week, that people actually want to do in-person shopping. It's almost like we're reclaiming all the stuff. We're sick of online shopping. We want to spend Christmas with our family, and it'll be great for the retail.
And what are you going to be eating at Christmas this year? Well, is it a traditional Christmas?
No, because I'm a vegetarian, so I always have a nut roast. But it's a nut roast with all the trim in.
You don't need to explain.
No.
Well, it varies. I don't know. It depends who I have Christmas with and what happens, complex family situations. But in our house, it's either goose or turkey. My dad was German, so goose is a bit more German. But lots of meat. Yes. Have you seen the Percy the Pig, Marks & Spencer's Christmas ad? Because that's the other one. And I just look at that poor little Percy and I think of pigs in blankets.
I looked at the John Lewis advert and I wondered if the ufologists will enjoy that. They'll be thinking the government are preparing to tell us something about aliens. It was very inclusive. Yeah. Meanwhile, we've been reading that Generation Z aren't great fans of Brussels sprouts. Neither am I. In fact, traditional festive favourites like Christmas pudding are at the risk of dying out as young people opt for Instagram-friendly brunch spreads instead of classic turkey and trimmings. Let's turn to the panel. Well, are you surprised by this?
Is that because the brunch thing, is that because it makes a good photo to stick on Instagram? Is that what it's all about?
I suspect so.
I have to be really careful not to start sounding like my mum now. And what's going on with the modern youth today? Brussels sprouts, you never like them when you're young, right? But you have to put up with them because it's Christmas. Put a couple of chestnuts in them. pour them in some gravy, meaty or vegetarian, whatever. You have to put up with Brussels sprouts.
I'm not actually convinced they're edible.
I think they're Satan's vegetable. They are disgusting. But I'll eat 2 or 3 if it's accompanied by lots of chestnuts and bacon and gravy and mixed up with the turkey. No, I don't get this brunch thing. They can't do that. That's just wrong. That's not Christmassy.
I wonder whether it reflects something on Generation Z's cooking abilities.
Yeah, maybe they've got to cook it themselves. Yeah.
You know, a roast is a complex meal. It's a lot of work to bring to the table for a swift feast, isn't it, really?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I just never thought about the fact they just want a good photo on Instagram. And, you know, actually, this is the other thing where I think don't boot the retirees out of their home, because everybody goes home to grandma's for Christmas dinner, don't they? And grandmas still know how to cook. So maybe this year they need to kind of teach Gen Z how to do it. Maybe that's what we should do.
I mean, I have to say it has to be roast potatoes and, you know, the whole thing, doesn't it? But it's a celebration, for goodness sake. It's about people, not the meal. It's not about a photograph on your phone.
Yeah.
It's about the conversation that you have around the table.
The first time I noticed that as a problem was when I went to see the Sistine Chapel, and everybody was on there, what do you call them, these iPads, looking at the Sistine Chapel through their screen. I thought, oh no, we've gone wrong somewhere here.
Well, actually, I agree with you. It's all about family. It's, well, of course, it's for some people it's also religious. It's an ancient, sacred, cultural, traditional festivity. So the idea that the government can cancel it is laughable anyway. But it's very much about being with your family, being with people. And I'm really looking forward to doing more of that this year. I mean, that was sad last year. But the other thing is the fact that it's increasingly being called gifting season. Or have you seen that? I've seen Christmas being called gifting season a couple of times, and there's something really cold and clinical about that for me. The gifts are lovely. The gifts are great. I love the gifts. But it shouldn't be called gifting season because it's about Christmas.
It's not about receiving. It's about the giving. That's the secret, I think, to Christmas.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, a few weeks ago, we met James Anderson, the founder of heating charity DEFA. He was one of our great Britons. Well, there's been a nice surprise for James. The actor, Hugh Grant, has donated £10,000 to James's GoFundMe page. We've approached Hugh Grant's agent, but the donation was confirmed by the GoFundMe site. James joins us again now.
Good evening.
Good evening, James. This is amazing.
It is. It was Christmas early.
And how do you know it was him?
Well, I went on the GoFundMe, and the way he spelt his name on that when he put the donation on is the same on Twitter. And he follows us on Twitter, so he watches what we do on there. So I went to GoFundMe and I asked him, could you just double check, please, make sure I don't want to jump around and dance and sing a song until I know it's actually him. And they come back to me on the Friday night and said, yeah, it is him. And I danced. I was, yeah, it was brilliant, excellent.
And just remind people what your charity does.
We deliver free plumbing and heating emergency response to the elderly, vulnerable and disabled. We also, during the Christmas period, deliver food, electric, gas and toys to families who are single parents, underprivileged, living on the poverty line. So we basically help everybody in the community around the winter.
I guess you never dreamt a Hollywood actor would support your charity.
I didn't know. I didn't expect it to go to that extreme, but I'm glad it did, because it has made a lot of other people turn their heads and look at us and go, wow, we need to look deeper into this, and it's got us a lot of support. Brilliant.
And what made you start in the first place?
An elderly gentleman in 2017 was given a quote for £5,500 for work he didn't need, and we got to him before he paid that. So he was nearly scammed by a road trader, and that made me then sit back and think there's thousands upon thousands of people in the country who are elderly and vulnerable that are in the same position every single year, and we need to do something about that. And that's when it was born.
I think this is just an incredible act by Hugh Grant. Well done, Hugh. Such a big-hearted gift to reach out and literally And you yourself as well, you know, it's amazing what you do. The combined effort, you're making people warm at the coldest part of the year. What could be better than that?
Well, nothing can be better. We've got boilers going in this week and next week because of Hugh's donation. One's a gentleman who hasn't had heating and hot water for 3 years. Another one is a gentleman who's suffering from cancer at the moment, and he's had no heating and hot water for months. So yeah, because of Hugh and everybody else that's donated to us, these people are going to be safe and warm on Christmas Day.
What do you make of that, Mo?
I'm reluctant to give any praise to Hugh Grant. Free plumbing, good. Free press, bad. But look, it is a really good gesture.
Oh, come on. Credit where it's due.
Yes, OK, 10,000. But also, as James says, all the other people that have donated, and he himself for coming up with this initiative in the first place. I'm more interested in ordinary people who do their bit and who are kind to their neighbours. And the work that James
you're
does
being
is fantastic.
a bit mean.
But I am not going to give Hugh Grant.
I'm going to put a different spin on it, though, because the thing is, by doing this, Hugh Grant's now raised the awareness of the charity a lot. Here they are on TV, they'll get a lot more awareness, they'll get more donations. So actually when a celebrity gives to a charity and endorses them, then it helps raise the profile of the charity
celebrities.
He's a celebrity because he earned the right to be one. He's a fantastic actor. And all credit to him. I think it's an amazing act.
Yeah.
And it's somebody actually stepping forward and doing something, not just talking. But it's great, though, that there is the charity there that he can support. I mean, what a wonderful charity that James has got.
I take your point. I was being a little bit facetious, Ray. You're quite right.
I think it's funny. James, you know, how many people do you see in a week in pursuit of these efforts?
In the summertime, in the warm months, we get between 20 and 30 a week. In the winter, we get up to 70 a week. This year it's actually gone above that because of the awareness that we've now got. So we're helping people all over the country, from Scotland all the way down to London. We've actually got someone helping someone in London, in Islington, on Monday because they've had no heating and hot water for quite a long time, and they got ripped off by 7 other plumbers. So we're helping him. Well, we're getting there for him as well.
Fantastic. I think it's absolutely amazing. There is nothing more miserable than when your plumbing goes wrong. And reaching out and helping the vulnerable in this way is, I take my hat off to you. Well done, you. Well, that's all from me. And my thanks to all my guests tonight and my panellists, Laura Dodsworth, and author of A State of Fear, and Mo Lovett, writer and academic. Mark Dolan is up next.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's